We are investing 7 times the amount the Tories were.
Politicians keep talking about what they're going to spend, as though it's their money.
Britain will be investing twice as much in our school children, 3 times as much in the NHS.
Help with heating bills, insulation, social tariffs.
1 million pensioners' homes insulated.
They haven't got any of their own money.
Doubling of the science budget.
Paid holidays for all workers.
The government doesn't have any money of its own.
Spending
money.
More. Spending free museum entry.
They've got our money.
It's not their money.
Today in Britain, the government spends more than all private individuals and companies put together.
They spent like there was no tomorrow.
350,000, 1 million.
1 million.
34 million.
You spend like that, eventually there won't be.
The last government tested to destruction the idea that more spending was the answer.
Today in Britain, the public sector is bigger than the private sector.
Thank you.
It's absolutely enormous, the size of the state now.
I've got £90,000 in my pyjamas.
George Osborne says his cuts will save Britain.
We will make sure that the financial catastrophe that happened under the previous government never ever happens again.
Nothing quite as wonderful as money.
But in the next 5 years, annual government spending will climb from £697 billion to £757 billion.
There are areas where more public money could usefully be spent.
What the government describe as a cut are not what you and I would normally think of as a cut.
More money, increases in spending is not going to be enough.
During all that time, we will be adding to the total indebtedness of the country.
The cuts are too little, too late. We now have a national debt of £4.8 trillion.
The figures involved are mind-blowing.
That's £77,000 for every man, woman and child in the United Kingdom. The government is borrowing money from people who haven't even been born yet.
As much as children depend on us today, we are going to depend on them for far longer.
You can easily get into a situation in which the indebtedness of the country is growing exponentially and uncontrollably.
That's the kind of spiral that leads to national ruin.
How did Britain end up on the verge of bankruptcy? How did we accumulate such gigantic debts? And how will we ever pay them back?
Nobody's realised the scale of it, the arithmetic of it.
My name is Martin Durkin. I'm going to show you how Britain got into this mess, and I'm going to tell you what I believe is the only way out. This story is about the growth of Britain's public sector.
Are you a consultation and communities engagement manager?
It's about the myth that state spending can stimulate real economic growth.
The government's always talking about putting more money into the economy, stimulating the economy with more money. But where does that money come from? The answer is that it comes from the rest of us.
It's about the devastating effects of big government spending on the real economy.
You have to remember that when the government creates a job by taxing more, it's destroying jobs elsewhere by the act of taxation.
This film exposes the absurd idea that state monopolies are the best way to deliver good services.
The state knows that monopoly is a bad idea. At exactly the same time, it insists on monopolies in education and health.
And it shows that far from combating poverty, state spending on a vast scale actually creates the most dreadful poverty.
If you're working on a fairly lowish wage, let's say £8,000, £9,000, £10,000 a year, you are still being clobbered for taxation.
The Robin Hood state is simply a myth that's used to justify punitive levels of taxation.
And I go to Hong Kong to look at an alternative path for Britain, to see how shrinking the state has transformed the fortunes of Asia.
The lesson for nowadays government to learn is to learn the humility in front of the people. To learn that it's the people who create wealth, given the freedom.
Britain's national debt amounts to £4.8 trillion. Is that a lot of money?
It is gigantic. I think the law of large numbers means it's almost too big for people to even imagine. And as you know, there's a difference between the debt and
the city. This is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. In fact, I don't even know what happens after trillion. So You know, maybe that'll be the next evolution. Just a lot of money.
Nobody's realised the scale of it, the arithmetic of it. We've failed, if you like, as a nation. Expert economists haven't drawn the matter sufficiently to the attention of the political class.
Are you concerned about the levels of debt?
I am very. It's so much beyond anything that I ever worked with when I was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Tiny figures have been exploded far beyond my understanding.
The figures involved are mind-blowing.
The real cost of bailing out the banks was trivial. It's estimated to have added a mere £73 billion to our debt, and the government may even make a profit when it sells back its bank shares. Trivial, at least, compared to our total debt of £4.8 trillion.
Now, 4.8 trillion is a very big number. It's hard to visualise that much money, but that's where the power of television comes in. Just suppose you counted out all that national debt in £50 notes. How high would your stack of 50s be? Bear in mind that a £50 note is very thin. It's officially just 0.11 of a millimetre. That means to get a stack just 1 millimetre high, you need almost £500.
According to the government, our national debt is around £1 trillion. But that figure does not include other hidden debts, like the government's gigantic pension liabilities. The government is relying on future generations to pick up the tab for the public sector and state pensions of people working today. When these hidden liabilities are added, government debt rises to £4.8 trillion. The British government has been spending money it didn't have, year after year, on a truly spectacular scale. Counted out in £50 notes, our national debt would form a stack no less than 6,500 miles high. Or to put it another way, if we sold all the houses and flats in the whole of the UK, we would still be the best part of £1 trillion short of paying back our debt. We decided to ask a random group of MPs about the enormous size of the debt. Here are some of their responses.
When it comes to the national debt, can you tell me what the rough figure is, sort of very, very roughly?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have that information.
Can you tell us what the official national debt is?
I don't have a figure for the official national debt.
Could you tell me very roughly, very roughly, what the current national debt is? Is it 10 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion, very roughly?
No, I couldn't, but it changes virtually every week.
Billions or trillions?
We're talking trillions, but trillions and billions really isn't what you need to explain to the public.
At the moment, for last year, it was about £156 billion.
It's 155 billion.
Something like £170 billion.
Don't you think it's important that MPs do know what the debt is?
Well, I go in and I take the debates very seriously. I listen to everything that's said.
Please explain what the difference is between budget deficit and national debt.
Well, I will leave that to economists to explain.
A common mistake among our MPs was to confuse the budget deficit, that's how much extra debt we're taking on each year, with the national debt. That's a very big mistake indeed. To illustrate how big, I'm running myself a bath.
So here we have the national debt in my bath, and here we have the budget deficit, the new debt that we're taking on coming out of the tax. And here we have George Osborne's cuts. He's using an egg cup. As you can see, although we are making cuts, we're still taking on far more debt than we are taking out in cuts. The level of the debt is continuing to rise. Despite the cuts, we're getting more and more in debt.
The government says it's cutting public spending, but actually most of those cuts are just cuts in projected increases. So in 5 or 6 years' time, public spending will actually be higher than it is currently and not very different in real terms after adjusting for inflation.
But during all that time, we will be adding to the total indebtedness of the country.
Britain's debt is gigantic and is getting bigger all the time. Some believe this isn't just insane, it's also deeply immoral.
The scales of debt and deficit are so huge that, in effect, the government is borrowing money from people who haven't even been born yet in order to pay for your and my lifestyles as we speak. That can't be right, can it?
It's a complete fraud. It's a complete theft. You are paying today's beneficiaries. You're paying yourself out of our children's and grandchildren's money.
The only reason they get away with it is because the unborn don't vote.
The immorality of this is breathtaking.
For years, public spending has been spiraling out of control. Last year, the government spent more on welfare payments alone than it raised in income tax. The resulting debts are so huge, it could take several decades to pay them off.
The money that the government is spending today is our money.
Would our children and grandchildren be happy in 2050 still to be paying for a massive splurge in public spending which took place in 2010? If they only knew what was coming their way, what would they say?
We're going to be paying this off for years and years. What's a trillion? I didn't know the numbers went that high. I don't even get pocket money.
Most of us care a lot about our children and grandchildren. We would do anything for them. We want them to be better off and lead fuller lives than we did. The idea of sponging off them or stealing their money upsets us. That is exactly what politicians have been doing in our name.
Instead of leaving our children and our grandchildren with a better world, it's saddling them with debts that are on a breathtaking scale and in effect condemning them to a life of slavery.
Now, when an individual or a company borrows money, they have to repay it themselves. But when a politician borrows money, it's completely different. The politician doesn't have to pay it back. The people who voted for the politician don't have to pay it back. It must be repaid by people who have had no say whatsoever in the transaction. Is that borrowing or stealing?
What do we want? When do we want it? Why do we have to pay?
All those people whining about cuts have to ask themselves, is it right to expect our children and grandchildren still to be paying for our profligacy in 20 or 30 years' time? I mean, how much of their money do we think it's okay to spend?
But as recent events in Europe have shown, the staggering size of our debt isn't just morally wrong, it's also dangerous and could quite easily tip Britain into chaos. For years now, the British government has been living beyond our means on an astronomical scale.
Hello, what's your name?
Elsha.
Hi, my name's Martin.
Hi, Martin.
Hi. Do you see that behind us, that big clock?
48 trillion billion in debt.
I've no idea. Hang on. 400. It sounds like 4,800,000 and something.
I wonder if you can tell me what that number is. I wonder if it's a very big one.
4 million? No, 4,800,000. No, God, I don't know.
Shall I tell you?
Yeah.
It's £4.8 trillion.
My goodness.
Does that worry you at all?
Yes,
We
it
have a
certainly
national
does.
debt.
It certainly does.
Do you think we're likely to pay it back very quickly?
No, not at all. I don't see any prospects of us paying it back at all in the near future. It's going to take generations to pay that back.
Despite the fuss about George Osborne's cuts, public spending in 5 years will be more or less the same as it is today, and our national debt will be even bigger. According to city commentators like Alistair Heath, the markets are worried not just about whether we can repay our national debt, but about whether we can sustain it.
Not only is the national debt very, very large at the moment, but that means obviously that the interest payment on that debt is eye-watchingly massive.
Soon we're going to be paying more interest on the government's debt than we do on all the nation's mortgages put together.
This is not like a fixed-term mortgage. Interest rates can go up.
Once interest rates start to go up, and they will, and they have to, and this is the lowest they've been in hundreds of years, then that puts the government in a very difficult situation.
Our payments will go up, and therefore the people lending us money, the financial markets and pension funds from all over the world, will start to worry that we can't actually pay this money back, so they will charge us an even higher interest rate.
Then you get into a very, very dangerous spiral, because people will always want more when they know that you're willing to pay more.
You can easily get into a situation in which the indebtedness of the country is growing exponentially and uncontrollably.
That's the kind of spiral that leads to national ruin.